Welcome, everybody, live at the Vortex in the ATL. This is a Christmas edition of Dirty South Security Podcast. I'm here live at the Vortex in Little Five Points, one of the infamous spots of the ATL, with the one and only Billy Hoffman. Billy, how you doing today?
I'm doing awesome, Tony. So happy to be here with you.
It's going to be a privilege to share the mic with you today. We have a great episode with you today, Christmas edition. I want to do a quick shout out to Kofi, who's not able to join us, my partner in crime on the Dirty South Security Podcast. He is in Ghana today. Unfortunately, his internet was not as resilient as was needed in order to live stream. But, Kofi, we're thinking about you, man. We got the beer flowing today. I'm here with Billy Hoffman. We're going to have an interesting conversation today. We're going to do you right and represent the Dirty South Security Podcast as we always do. All right, here we go. All right, Billy, this is great to have you here for this episode of the Dirty South Security Podcast. I don't know if you know the format, but we dive in, we get dirty, no punches are pulled, and we definitely want a lot of your expertise. You're a bit of veteran in the industry. Tell us what you're up to these days.
Most recently, I was at Splunk after they acquired a startup that I was a part of. And as I was looking through sort of the space and deciding what did I want to do again, I needed to get back and doing a startup. Big companies don't agree with me. And as I talked to like friends and I was talking to people in the space, I was realizing some people were saying they were really struggling with just securing everything their organization had that was publicly exposed. I talked to some folks in incident response, and they're like, yeah, all the time we're having to come in and troubleshoot something. And when we resolved like the root cause of where people got in, it was on some asset we didn't even know about. And at first I thought this seemed insane. Like, how can you not know everything you have that's publicly facing? Like,
right.
What is your vulnerability management or patch management teams doing? How could things be slipping through the cracks? This seems crazy to me. But, you know, we've seen a lot of changes in the last 10, 15 years, right? We've moved from centralized IT orgs to decentralized IT orgs. When you had to go to like a centralized IT team and be like, yeah, I need to provision, new systems, they'd spin up a VM for you or something. But now it's all utility computing. You just use a corporate AMX and you go spin something up in a cloud provider. You're not going through sort of that centralized choke point.
Right.
And so that dawned on me. It's like, wow, no, it's actually... It's so easy to get compute, and it's often IT and security you're finding out about it after the fact, right? This is why we have shadow IT as a thing. And then you kind of get into the whole cloud ops, right? People are really great at spinning up infrastructure and pretty bad about spinning them down. I once worked with somebody who would keep loosening the ACLs on an AIM role, and he came to me, he's like, look, I don't know why we had to do this to make like dequeuing from SQS work, but once I did this, it worked, and I'm not going to mess with it. And I'm like, okay, well, the application guy in me is like, oh, thank God this is working. The security guy in me is like, that's terrifying.
Right.
That we just loosened permissions until it worked, and then we're going to roll with that. So it dawned on me that, for large organizations, they just have so much IT that's moving so quickly. They're acquiring things. They don't know what they should protect. And I thought that was kind of a really, conceptually simple, but surprisingly complex area, and I wanted to go solve it.
Absolutely. Well, this is a great segue to our topic for today. Vuln Management Meltdowns, revisiting Autopatching, and future-proofing resiliency.
Yeah.
So how about you take a swig of that beer, and let's go ahead and dive in. All right. This episode, we're going to talk about on Vuln Management Meltdowns. We're going to evolve from there and go to revisiting Autopatching. All right. And then we're going to go into future-proofing resiliency. So first topic, really quick. Let's dive into Vuln Management Sucks. Underlying points is, just to kind of set the table. Vuln management over the past 15, 20 years has been find vulnerability with tool that tells you what's high, medium, low, critical, and then without any sort of business context whatsoever, with zero context of countermeasures, and with a roughly 70% oftentimes false positive rate.
What are all the things that are there? I think the classic example of this is the, hey, it's an Nginxer and it's a Apache box. Let's tell you about a web dev CVE you have. And it's like, I don't even have web dev configured on this box. I mean, yes, technically version number says if I had this turned on, it would be vulnerable.
Right.
But the Vuln scanner just, fingerprinted the box based on, or the software based on the banner, and then just vomited some CVEs at you.
Yeah, exactly. I remember still Nullcon from about 12 years ago. They had like Qualys researchers, all the researchers from all the major brands, and they said basically roughly they admitted 70% false positive rate because they're still looking at a value either in the registry on Windows or they're looking at a value in a flat file config, and that might not necessarily be the indication that you actually have a vulnerability with a running process.
Yeah.
All right, let's evolve into some of the bigger challenges. Real enterprise problems in vuln management is that you have vulnerabilities now in the millions at some places. Okay.
Yeah.
And so how do you even like celebrate going from 5 million vols down to 2.5 million? Like, what are we celebrating here, right?
They actually used to talk about in the nuclear disarmament talks. They'd be like, great, instead of 60,000 bullets pointed at your chest, I've only got 10,000 bullets pointed at your chest.
Yeah.
Do you feel safer?
Right.
Right? It's like, great, you went from 5 million to 2.5. Do you feel more secure?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's so the problem that we still have, now we're in 2025, a quarter of a century has basically come, and we're still in the same boat. It's amazing to even think. We're on the heels. So CVS 4.0 just got released. It has some attributes into that scoring system where you have, a deeper attributes on attack likelihood, attack attributes, and things like that. You have EPSS for the exploit probability scoring system and the known exploit vulnerability database to basically correlate, because there's roughly about 10 to 15% of the known CVEs have associated exploit code.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
So is it worthwhile to basically be concerned about the rest of the 80, 85, whatever?
Yeah.
That's the question. What do you think?
I think if you're just looking at CVE scores and or CVEs that come out and you're trying to stay on top of them, you have to have some sort of other filter on that. Like, we're on track. I think we're going to surpass 40,000 new CVEs just this year alone.
Yeah.
And let's assume 1/10 of those are all that apply to your organization. Fine, great. You're dealing with 4,000 vulnerabilities. You're dealing with over 10 new vulnerabilities every day. Right? No. And then you're trying to assess across that really diverse IT environment. Do we even have the technology? Where is it? Is it configured in such a way that's actually exploitable? And to your point, a lot of these don't have public exploit code. Like, it is a losing battle to try to keep up with it that way.
Right.
So I try to instead think of it as like, there has to be other context in play. Is this actually exploitable? Is this remotely exploitable? Do we have something that maybe a threat actor could be using, right? A lot of threat actors, yes, you have nation states that are finding new 0 days and researching it, but a lot of other threat actors, Russian ransomware gangs, they're lazy, right? We'll talk about one later that's using a 10-year-old cross-site scripting CVE.
Yeah.
But they're not out there doing their own exploit development. They're wanting to take the off-the-shelf ones that are out there. So I feel like just straight up looking at which ones actually have exploit code, you're dealing with a couple orders of magnitude less. And then you can start trying to apply them of like, which ones of these should we be thinking about? Cool, let's overlay a business context on top of that.
Yeah.
It's not about the CVE. You could have two different assets, same CVE, but it's understanding, hey, this asset, what's it connected to? Is this just some, M3 small in AWS that's isolated by itself, or is this like an I don't even know, XXL that's, connected to these giant RDS databases with a terabyte of PHI, right? There has to be a broader context to help you understand what you should focus on.
Absolutely. Well, after all this time, we don't have that context. So, I mean, going back to the first point so we can put that to rest and move on.
Yeah.
Do you think that we are any closer to not saying that vulnerability management sucks? What's the next evolution beyond vuln management?
I wish I had a good answer for this. I feel like it's like brushing and flossing your teeth, right? It's not going to get better, but you should still do it. We need to we should try to find more efficient ways of spending that time.
Okay.
But I don't see anything on the horizon that's going to make vuln management and then corresponding patch management on top of that suck any less. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think, that's a good one to put a bookmark for closing thoughts, because I have a couple ideas. Let's go to end of life. You alluded to some of the end of life software that still exists.
Yeah.
I mean, here we are again in 2025.
Yes.
And of course, there's a lot of industries that admittedly, healthcare, in industrial, control systems, energy, where they can't exactly do a technology refresh every year, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, realistically, but it still poses a problem, right? End-of-life software is still out there at the OS level, in embedded components. How do you, you talked about some of these examples. Restate for us the overall inherent problem or impact, and then where do we go from addressing, end-of-life software?
Yeah, I'm so glad we're talking about this. So let's go back to the avalanche of CVEs that's happening right now. So the way most organizations kind of try to keep up with this from security side is say, hey, look, we can't keep track of everything. Let's cut this off. Let's set probably internal KPIs around criticals and highs. We're going to patch criticals within, say, depends on the org, but it might be, 14 days, 30 days, highs, let's say 60 days. Let's track whether we're doing that. Some organizations hit it, some of them don't. But what's fine, they just sort of, it's like triage. They're like, we can't worry about the bottom part of the iceberg. Let's just focus on the criticals and highs. But then the challenge is that you have software that maybe has medium severity issues that is in critical infrastructure.
Right.
We saw this with, I believe it was a Cisco
ASA.
Yeah.
Right.
The cross-site scripting vulnerability. This is a 10-year-old cross-site scripting vulnerability.
Yep.
Literally, if you go to look it up in the National Vulnerability Database, all of the references that it points to, it's like security focused.
CVE 2014, 2020, 2120, yeah.
And it's like, oh man, RIP security focus. I used to love listening to that. I had to use the Wayback Machine to go find the exploit code for this. And what cracks me up about this is that it shows that you can't only focus on criticals and highs, because you know me, I have a special place in my heart for cross-site scripting.
Yeah.
Some of my first Black Hat talks were about cross-site scripting in JavaScript. But cross-site scripting vulnerability in a CMS, okay, bad, but not life-shattering.
Right.
A cross-site scripting vulnerability in a web VPN, where now I'm hijacking your session on a VPN and I'm moving laterally, way more important. So this concept of let's just look at the CVSS score. Oh, it's a medium. We don't need to worry about it. No. It's a medium, but in what type of application?
Right.
Are you using that? And I think the reason this persisted so long is that this is like critical infrastructure. We don't want to take our VPNs down to update them, and they're still working. And oh, by the way, this was a medium. And so people just put it off. And so here we are 10 years later running literally end-of-lifed years ago, but people are still running it because, hey, it's the VPN. Don't screw with IT if it's working, right? If we try to do this and we mess it up, we know that'll be a bad thing. We know there'll be downtime. People won't be able to access the infrastructure remotely. There is a known downside if we screw that up. What's the downside if we don't update this?
Right.
Well, nobody's exploited it in the last 8 years. Maybe we can let it go another 2 years. And so they always, I feel like IT downtime costs are really, really well understood, but security costs often aren't understood. They're more nebulous. And so organizations, they try to be rational and logical, and they say, look, I would rather take a chance on an unknown cost than this known bad cost of downtime.
Right. You had a quote there that I'll recycle that basically says, you look at the CVSS score, in the absence of context, you just kind of shrug your shoulders and let the tool dictate what you need to do or how you need to prioritize a vulnerability. I affectionately call CVSS the complacent vulnerability scoring system.
I haven't heard that. That's
because good. You don't have the context, and you don't, as a security operator, oftentimes. I mean, you've been to so many different operations groups and individuals. They're relying on what the output of the tool is to basically for them to go tell their internal customers that their baby's ugly and that they need to patch or remediate something. So, again, context makes a big deal in terms of going back to the web server, that the CMS with the vulnerability with the cross-site scripting. Context of use, context of impact to the business. If CVSS isn't the way, then how do you see us pivoting? So let's go back to EPSS for a second, where it's doing regression analysis on historic, vulnerabilities to look at what's probable based upon certain characteristics of that vulnerability. Now, there isn't mass adoption yet with EPSS. And, also known exploit vulnerability database, KEVs.
Yeah.
How do we, if you're basically back at Black Hat, Billy, and you're addressing a room full of executives in security operations and CISOs, what are you telling them? How are you telling them to change their playbooks from, the status quo way of doing things, right?
Yeah.
Set scanning schedule up, get results, review them, and then just assign in Jira, for
a ticket
remediation.
That'll never be looked at again.
Exactly. And then you get to 30 million or 5 million vulnerabilities, and then you have the dashboards, and then someone gets fired.
Yeah, 100%. And then a new CISO gets hired, and in 3 years they'll take another bullet because this system's not working, and you start it again.
Of course, they'll replace the existing vulnerability scanner with another vulnerability scanner because that was the whole problem, right?
Yes, of course. It was. Yeah, exactly. I'm so glad you brought up EPSS because I really like this. It kind of reminds me of insurance, where it's like, let's try to apply some sort of like probability rate of what is this happening. Is this a 10-year flood issue or is this a 100-year flood issue?
Right.
So they're using data to help you sort of understand, look, out of all these things, what's likely to have happened? And that's a nice step in the right direction. But when I'm talking to like either VPs of InfoSec or CISOs, deputy CISOs, my feedback is always, look, you have a better understanding of your business, where your data is stored, what's the classification of that data. Like first of all, step one, if you don't know where the secrets are, where are the things you're supposed to be protecting and validating that from like a regulatory perspective, holy shit, stop talking to me. You got other things you got to be dealing with. So I try to say, hey, look, you need to bring a lens of a business context here. Let's have a more prioritized approach to say, okay, cool. Let's triage these vulnerabilities that are coming out. Let's now apply a filter on top of what's the likelihood of them getting exploited. But then let's have an understanding of, okay, what piece of the business is this in? What's the business context of this application? Is it an internal portal? Is it customer facing? What type of data is it controlling? And oh my gosh, if you're going to file a ticket in Jira, I think ultimately you should treat security defects the same way you treat sort of regular engineering tasks, but give them like a special type.
Right.
Because everyone knows like tickets is where like they just atrophy in Jira, but like if you should have, as a security professional, you should have a dashboard that's saying, show me how long has this thing been sitting in Jira and not being acted upon. Right. Have a dashboard, put KPIs around that, get alignment between the engineering orgs, the products orgs, and the security orgs. And I feel like it's got to be it's about positioning and understanding. You talked about sort of that adversarial, oh God, someone's going to come and tell my baby it's ugly. It's, hey, I'm not trying to say that your baby is ugly. I'm trying to protect your baby because I think your baby's awesome. And think about how bad your baby's going to look when, the Wall Street Journal is publishing an article about it, right? So like, what can we do from a general like risk perspective to make sure that your baby is as awesome as it can be?
I love the positive spin on the Dirty South Security podcast. We keep it dirty.
That's right.
So as the one holding the red mic and on the more offensive mic,
I'm on blue team.
I gotta, I really admire your trust in the CISO's current status quo CISO's knowledge of their business. I personally feel that it's the 1% that might actually have a genuine knowledge and an actual interest, because honestly, it's a hard job. It's a hard job.
It is. And I don't want to be overly optimistic, but I do want to say, like, look, go back to first principles. Ignore vendors, ignore anything I have to say. If you're just coming in and your job is to secure an organization, how do you do that? All right, step one. What do we have that's valuable? What is it that we need to protect? Right? This is why you don't put, why everyone's front door isn't a bank vault door, right? Because it doesn't need to be. The stuff that's inside of your house is probably not the same stuff that's in Fort Knox.
Right.
So the level of spend and the amount of effort you put in to protect something is directly proportional to its value, right? And so a new CISO coming in, your number one job is to understand, what do we have? What's important? Not just from a data perspective, but from like a business value perspective. If you have a system that is a credit card processing system or a billing system or a vendor, portal processing system, like if that's the core part of your business, it can't go down. In the same way that IT is going to spend resources from an observability perspective, a monitoring perspective, a redundancy, a failover, doing like blue-green deploys and being able to roll back quickly, they'll invest heavily in having the ability to, respond and have really high levels of uptime and resiliency. That almost can be used as a proxy to say, interesting, you're spending pretty heavily for these systems. Why? Why are those systems so important to the business?
Right.
Wow, that sounds like something from a security and a risk perspective we should be spending commiserately to lock them down.
Right.
And you just have to start from that perspective and sort of try to understand, what is this business doing?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think that, the industry of security professionals, however, they're not well equipped to understand, to have that business acumen. And that's part of the problem because, right, they're focused on their security responsibilities that are very policing-like, and they're relying on tools to be able to say, I found something that is, according to them, critical, but maybe according to the business, it's not critical.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought this up, Tony. It's almost like if I could give every security leader an MBA, not literally, but this idea that I feel like I love security because until last decade or so, there really weren't sort of formal graduate and undergraduate programs around it. There are now. So a lot of the people who are in security leadership now, people our age and a little older, they grew up in the trenches, just learning this stuff themselves, and they're coming at it from a very technical focus.
Right.
They don't necessarily have that business thoughts, and I feel it's critical to understand. Like, yes, this is why EPSS is very interesting. Like, yes, if you're ignoring the probability of this thing being exploited, it is a critical, it looks bad, should you fix it? A security person would say yes. A business person might say no. Right. There's no critical data on that system. It's an isolated marketing website. It is and the EPSS says it has a super low probability of being exploited. And great, someone defaces a website.
Yep.
Right? You have to have that understanding. As security people, I feel that rubs us the wrong way. It's like, no, it's look how dark that shade of red is. You have to fix it. It's like, no. It's always through the lens of the business context.
It's a great segue to autopatching because, the autopatching was rumored as a mythical creature to come in as some sort of like griffin, mythical creature in the 1700s to be able to come and swoop in and automatically patch, what needed to be patched and save the day. It myopically didn't have the context of like, if I patch this, will something break? Oh, because security professionals, again, they're not oftentimes thinking about the function of what that asset is doing or the application.
Yes.
And so applying a patch that came from a manufacturer and without the context of, seeing how it affect features and functions of that particular node is, I wanted to get your sense of like, okay, auto-patching has been talked about for 10 years. Have we hit auto-patching? Is there a future for auto-patching?
Not in its current form. Okay. I don't believe so. Because ignore the security auto-patching angle on this. Organizations all the time have to deal with, hey, Microsoft's deprecating this version of .NET. Hey, we need to update it. Oh, wait, that means we now need to update all the packages we're pulling in. Oh, wait, now that means this weird custom package we have no longer, like, it works and applies. So, like, we've already had sort of this pain of needing to understand you can't just randomly update a library, right? Great, you update this library and performance just went down 20%. Like,
right.
Did you test it ahead of time? Like, from a product management perspective, the way we handle this is we almost kind of treat it like tech debt issues when engineering will say, hey, look, we need to spend some number of story points this sprint cleaning this thing up. And traditionally, product management would push back on that. I feel good product managers understand, look, the way we're going to be able to move fast and develop new features that'll unlock revenue is we have to be able to have a resilient system that can move fast. And if we're kind of creaking under all this tech debt weight, we can't be agile. I apply that same process from the security patching perspective. You can't just automatically patch things. You're going to mess stuff up. You should treat it the same way you would a normal, like, hey, Microsoft is deprecating this. Hey, we need to move, this version of Node or what have you.
Right.
And so it needs to be planned for. It needs to be understood and then implemented and say, hey, look, we need to do an update. Now, luckily, a lot of security updates, they're like point releases. But depending on the vendor, some vendors are like, you know what? This is a really old version. This is a 10-year-old web VPN.
Right.
The right way to update this is to go from version 1.3 to version 5.
Yeah.
You can't do that without understanding the impact. So right. I think it is have an early and often conversation with product and with the engineer. Security needs to be at that table. And you plan it the way you would a regular sort of library update. And it is more complicated. You can't just have an auto magic thing that does it.
Well, listen, so far this podcast episode has been pretty depressing, I got to say.
Oh, no, we don't be depressing.
But so I'm looking forward to our closing comments, how we're going to save the planet and make Vuln management not be a meltdown. But let's go into the final chapter here. Sure. Of course, we would be remiss in 2025 or starting 2025 in just a few weeks if we didn't talk about AI and its implications for being the superhero in resolving vuln management.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there's a lot of companies, you as an entrepreneur and being a part of so many different startups in your day, there's so much false marketing and snake oil that's being done right now with mishyping AI. Now, in the area, specifically in the area of vuln management, where it's offering the contextualization of risk automagically, I'll say, and then also, being able to do auto patching with the appropriate level of context of what to patch, how to patch it, etc. I think you would agree that it's a level of irresponsibility in messaging that. But
Agreed.
Where do you think, on a positive note, in all seriousness, there is a place for artificial intelligence with respect to vuln management?
I view it on the threat hunting and incident response side, honestly. Okay. I feel like in vulnerability management, the pain of a false positive or a false negative is too great.
Okay.
You don't want it to say, oh, you can totally do this thing, and it's hallucinating and you can't, you screw something up. Or it thinks, hey, this is actually, this actually isn't an important issue, and it is. Where I think AI, from a defensive perspective, is most applicable is, hey, I'm doing incident response, I'm having to dig through a pile of logs. Maybe I'm using forensics tools, maybe I'm using homegrown sort of like pipelines driven off, grep and different things like that to slice and dice and try to figure out what happened. AI is super good at saying, like, show me the anomalies in this. Show me which one of these things is not like the other. It does a really great job, and you're probably going to be backstopping it anyway and doing some of your own analysis. But if you can use, especially in incident response and in threat hunting, if you can process this information faster and react more quickly. From an incident response, you could potentially close and clean up the issue before they're moving around inside your organization even more. Or from a threat hunting perspective, you can start to identify, wait a minute, here's actually an area where there's a big risk for us, and we know people are actively trying to probe around this stuff. Let's lock this down. Time is of the essence in those two endeavors, and I feel like AI, especially sort of the summarization and the interpretation part, does a really good job of picking out those needles in the haystack when time is critical.
Well, I mean, we both know that, the AI is the front, is the mascara to the real, crux of the technology, which is really the data set, right?
Yes, yeah.
So the data set is the heart of the algorithm applied in the artificial intelligence. So going back to vuln management, what happens if you have a data set that goes back years for an environment that kind of sees a pattern of, vulnerabilities, maybe on front-end web servers or on middleware, systems, and then, also seeing, what patches have actually worked so that you can establish a formula for maybe selective auto patching, right?
Have you seen that be successful, though?
I haven't seen it be successful. But theoretically, right?
The Griffin.
The Griffin. I'm establishing a new Griffin. But I mean, I think from a data science standpoint, right? If I've been patching systems for 20 years, and that with patches, it's a one-to-many relationship. You apply a patch, it addresses, hopefully 10, 20 scores of different, vulnerabilities that you found, right? So if you have 20 years of doing vuln management and remediation, and you see that certain integrity of certain patches applied doesn't introduce any sort of reversions or backout plans, then I would say that from the data, right? So I mean, a little bit less Griffin and myth, dragon folklore, and a little bit more substance in the science. I think there is a case for using that data set. Now the problem is are companies looking at their data sets, right? They don't have a data scientist to be able to, understand, to establish some level of trends operationally that they can, leverage an AI decisioning, right, function to say, hey, let me do this on a consistent level.
You're convincing me. In fact, I see a similarity between both the things we're saying, which is don't necessarily allow an AI to run on a data set and then make its own decisions, but instead the power of an AI is it's really good at crunching a large amount of data and helping you pick out patterns that maybe you couldn't see beforehand. So if you could go over a bunch of historic information around where have vulnerabilities traditionally been present, what type of patching has we done, what is the success rate of that patching been, you could then use that to say, cool, of these issues we now need to deal with, right, of these vulnerabilities we have right now, what is the most, break this down from a probability perspective of which of these are likely to be less painful to do, and which ones of these probably are going to be a little more involved. Because then, kind of like almost EPSS, you can use that as a filter on top of that list to help prioritize it, to say, look, show me of everything the vulnerability management product is telling me I need to fix. Show me the things that are most likely to be exploited. Let's bring in some context around the business, but also overlay based on our historic performance. Which one of these is likely to be not very painful?
Right.
So show me highly likely to be exploited, probably not painful for me to fix. That's going to help prioritize that, human time. And we were talking about this earlier, right? The time of your people is so critical, and there are only more demands on your security person's time or your team's time. And
Right.
so anything you can do to help prioritize and say, well, this is what the biggest bang for your buck is going to be, I could see value there. I like that.
Well, let's close out with the following. I want to do final thoughts with you really quick. This is a Dirty South Security podcast.
Okay.
Don't think about it too much, but I'm going to put a hypothetical situation. Let's say that
you're springing it on me. I love it.
You're sitting back on the ATL. You get a call from Elon and President-elect, and there's a new Department of Vulnerability Efficiency.
Okay.
That's been established in the federal government. What sort of forward-thinking strategies would you lay down that you think that could basically undo the sentiment on the title of this podcast, which is, vulnerability management meltdowns? How do we get out of this rut?
Wow, that's a great question. And now you're going to make me look really dumb by not having an awesome answer to it. My feel is that there is a lot of systems that are not being properly assessed. I have a feeling there is a lot of people who are not particularly well trained using broad security-based tools and then just acting on CVSS scores, right? It's not this more advanced process we're doing. So whenever I come into a new organization, here's a good answer. Whenever I come into a new organization, I always sit down and I'm like, show me how you do your job. Let me watch how you do it. Show me right now, how are you discovering everything you're supposed to be scanning? What are you scanning it with? Great. What do you do with the output of that? I love focusing on deliverables. Like, what's the output of your process?
Right.
And how high quality is that? And how much work did it take you to generate that? I suspect if I did that, a lot of the stuff we're talking about today that kind of helps people be more efficient and only focused on the most important exposures and the most likely, the easiest thing to patch with the least likelihood of knock-on effects, I would suspect they're probably not doing a lot of that.
Okay.
And so that's what I would say. Let's just look at your job. Where are you spending your time? What's the output? And I would try to start incrementally updating things.
Okay.
Not that I would ever give Elon Musk advice, but my thought would be is that don't fall into second system syndrome problem, right? It's the Joel Spolsky, let's do a rewrite.
He's a subscriber to the Dirty South Security podcast, so
clearly.
Expect a call before the new year.
Don't do a rewrite. I would try to focus on incremental improvements because you're going to see ROI much more quickly than that.
Yeah.
And you have to ship of Theseus this, right? Replace a part, replace a part, replace a part. And then sure enough, you take a step back and you're like, we built a whole new boat and it's a way better boat.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm going to end with my thoughts really quick. 3 things really come to mind. Hardening, preemptive hardening, regression testing, and threat modeling. So on the hardening side, I think, that goes along with spinning up systems and tearing them down.
Yeah.
So you spin up a system, you harden it, and then instead of patching, you just tear it down, and then you instantiate new nodes that have the latest of everything.
Yeah.
Now, from a functional standpoint, you need to be able to obviously test your software layer on top of that new spun, new and shiny Cadillac, right? Node that's coming into the environment.
And that I think I love you're talking about this because that kind of goes hands in hand with how mature are your DevOps practices.
Yeah.
Your security practices are going to piggyback on top of your IT and DevOps practices.
Right.
And if you have the ability to be sort of more stateless and doing the cattle not pets approach to systems,
right,
then you can totally do this approach to security.
Absolutely. And the last thing, because I did a 2-in-1 there, I did the the hardening and the really kind of building up using DevOps to kind of spin up already pre-existing hardening systems. But threat modeling, you mentioned something, an example that I use all the time. In our real life, like at home, we basically implement physical security at our home that's commensurate to what we're protecting, right?
Yes.
If you have 12 stacks of gold bricks, you're probably going to have more improved physical security measures.
Yeah.
And we don't have that approach. And I'll say, with the risk-centric threat modeling, PASTA things that I always talk about worldwide, is to be able to contextually say, what are we actually caring about, right? And then how do we operationalize the vulnerabilities that we need to remediate? Let's say that you do have 5,000 vulns right across your stack.
Yeah.
Well, which of those vulns are actually going to give way to the threat in your threat model, right? And so it's a risk-centric approach. Those are my takeaways, but I know we've been dueling with these battling iPhones right
We've
here.
been both propping up our phones.
Your phone, your finger is literally like
it is so
macadamia, like white chocolate white. So let's enjoy our beers. It's great to be able to rock it out with you, close out the new year. Thanks so much for joining us at the Dirty South Security Podcast, and best of luck to you, Billy.
Thank you, Tony. It's been a blast.
Appreciate it.